Welcome to Unit 4, Lesson 6. Today you're going to be learning how to multiply whole numbers by decimals. Now turn to page 131 of your math workbook, and we'll take a look at this table. It says the Ruiz children had a yard sale. They sold some toys. They made a table to show how many toys they sold and how much money they earned. Now, the first thing you want to do whenever you see a table like this is to go through and make sure you understand exactly what the table is telling you. And so I'll take a look at each column, all the headings in the columns. This is the number of items that they sold. You can go through the list here and see that they sold 3 jump ropes, 4 marbles, 6 toys, and 5 puzzles. The second column is the price of the item. The third column is a total earned in cents, and they're using a mathematical equation. And the final column is the total earned in dollars. And so they sold 3 jump ropes at 9 cents each. 3 times 9 equals 27 cents, so that's how much they would have earned. And when you convert this to dollars, you would use a decimal. 3 times 9 cents equals 27 cents. So this column over here is very similar to this column. This column is figuring out the amount of money they earned without using decimals, and this one is using decimals because they're converting it to dollars and cents. Each one of these says the exact same thing. You can go through that on your own if you wish, but I'm going to start with number 1. How did they know the number of decimal places in each product in the last column? So in this column over here, how did that person know that they needed 2 decimal places? Can you please examine this table and come up with your own opinion as to how they knew to put 2 decimal places in their final product? So I'd like you to look at the third column over here. Notice the total amounts for each product that they sold, and here is where you will need to total all of those amounts to find out how much money they earned in dollars. These decimals are already lined up for you, so you can pause the video and do that now. Cool. The next question says, Mia saves change from her lunch money each day. She gets 34 cents in change, and she's been saving it for 26 days. She wants to use the steps below to find out how much money she has saved so far. You can see over here on the right-hand side that they took the 34 cents and are multiplying it by 26 days. Of course, you could use repeated addition and just add 34 cents 26 times. But this would be easier to do, of course. And then right next to it, they're breaking this down into its place values. So we're taking the 3, which is worth 30 cents here. 3 is in the tenths place, and it's worth 30 cents. So we're going to break this number into 2 parts. We're going to break it into each digit's value. The 3 is worth 30 cents, and the 4 is worth 4 cents. So we're going to turn this into 30 cents plus 4 cents. We're going to take the 26 and break it down into its digits values as well. The 2 is worth 20 because it's in the tens place, so we're going to break it into 20 and then add 6 to it. And then they're going to ask you to multiply each of these separately to find partial products or partial answers, part answers, and then add those 2 partial products together to find your final answer. It's very similar to the 2 square or the 4 square that we've been taught in the past. In step 1, they are actually going to break this down, and it really is the 4 square method that we've learned before, so don't panic when you see it written horizontally like this. But what they're doing is they're taking the 6, which is the 6 in the factor 26, and multiplying it by 4 cents, which is the 4 and the 34 cents, to get 24 cents, which is the first step you will be using in the shortcut method. So they got 24 cents from that. And then they're going to do the 6, the same 6, multiply it by the 3, which is worth 30 cents. That will get them 180 cents. 180 cents is really $1.80. So that's the second partial product. Well, in a 4 square, you're going to have 4 partial products. And we have only done so far the 6. So now we need to move over to the 2, which is worth 20. So we're going to do 20 times 4 cents and get 80 cents. And then you need to convert that into decimals, into money. And then 20 cents times the value of the 3 again up here, which is 30 cents. And 20 times 30 is 60. And it's 60 dimes, or 600 cents, because 20 times 3 is 6 with 2 zeros, which is 600 cents, which really is 60 dimes. If you divide by 600 by 10, you could cross one of those out, and you'd have 60 tens, and a 10 is a dime. A dime is 10 cents. So 60 tens is the same as 60 dimes. That's where they're getting that from. You'll need to convert that, as you did the previous one, into a decimal, into money form on this line here. Then you'll need to total that total amount. I want to remind you again that this is really just a 4 square, and if you completed this as a 4 square, you would see where these numbers are coming from. They started with 34 cents and broke it into 30 plus 4, and 26 where they broke into 20 plus 6. And so you can see now where the first problem is coming from, 6 times 4 cents. Well, 6 times 4 cents would be right here, 6 times 0.04. The 6 times 30 cents would go here, 6 times 0.30. The 20 times 4 cents would go here, 20 times 4 cents. And the 20 times 30 cents would go here. So it's really a 4 square. They just rewritten it probably to confuse you, but they've rewritten it in horizontal form. But you can see it's really the same. Question number 3, after you've found the total, says how many decimal places are there in the decimal factor 0.3434 hundredths? How many decimal places are there in the answer? So what they're really asking you to do here is to make an observation. There are how many decimal places in this number, and how many decimal places did you end up having in your answer? Do you see any similarities or differences between those two? On page 132 of your workbook, they're describing a bead factory, how it makes or it spends 65 cents to make each crystal bead. The steps below are going to show you how Antonio finds the total amount that the factory spends to make 222 crystal beads. This is your problem in essence. This is the way you would set it up to do the shortcut method. And again, they're going to not do the shortcut method and show you a different way of doing that. Step 1 is to multiply the number in the ones place. So they're going to take the 2 and multiply that by the entire amount of 65 cents. Then here you will find your partial product. And then in step 2, you will take the 2 in the tens place, which is worth 20, and multiply that by the entire factor of 65 cents and find your second partial product. And then finally, you'll take your 2 in the hundreds place, which is worth 200, and multiply that by the entire factor of 65 cents to find your partial product there as well. Then you will add all your partial products together to get your final product. There's a couple of ways that we could do these. We could take the 2 times 65 cents and do repeated addition to find the product for that. But we can also multiply. And let me show you exactly how you would do that. You would take your 65 cents and multiply it by 2 and kind of ignore the decimal at this point. We'll come back to that decimal in a minute, but for now, just pretend it's 65 times 2, and we're going to do this the traditional way. So we do 2 times 5, which is 10, and we would bring the 0 down and carry the 1. And then 6 times 2, which is 12, plus 1, which is 13. So we have 130. And now we need to go back up and look at that number, the product or the factor that has the decimal in it. And we want to find out how many digits are behind the decimal. So in this factor, we have 1, 2 numbers that are behind the decimal. 2 numbers that are behind the decimal. We have no decimal on the other factor. So because there are 2 numbers that are behind the decimal, we're going to come down to our final answer, and we're going to reveal our decimal at the end of the number, which is where it always is, at the end of a whole number. And we're going to move the decimal 2 times to the left. It's going to be 1, 2 times to the left, and we're going to put the decimal right there. And so for this particular problem, it's going to be $1.30. And this is how you multiply with decimals. So we're going to do the same thing for step 2, except now we're multiplying 20 times 65, which is almost exactly the same as the original problem. So I'm just going to add a 0 here. And when I do that, when I multiply, I'll end up with the same digits. And as I've advised you in the past, when you have zeros at the end of numbers that you're multiplying, it's best to kind of not use those zeros, ignore them until you get your final product, which was 130, and then return that 0 to your product. So because I added a 0 to my second factor, I know that I'm going to ignore that 0, which will mean that my product will be exact same, and then I'm going to return that 0, which means now my product is the same with an extra 0. So it's now changed from 130 to 1300. However, the number of decimal places in my first factor has not changed. It's still 2 numbers to the right of the decimal. So I'm counting these numbers because that's how many times I'm going to move my decimal. So I have a 6 and a 5 after the decimal, and I have no decimal on the second factor. So I'm going to then just count how many numbers and how many digits I have after all the decimals in all of my factors. And since I only have 1, I'm only counting these 2. So there are 2 digits after the decimal. So now I'm going to bring my decimal up, reveal it, which is after the whole number where it always is. If you don't see a decimal, it's at the end. And then I'm going to move it 2 times to the left. I always move it the same direction every time to the left. And that gets me $13. And now I have one more to do, and as you can see that the only difference between this next problem is an extra 0, and so I'm going to add my extra 0 to my problem, which means I'm going to get the exact, I'm going to ignore that 0 as I did in the past, multiply 65 cents times 2 and get 130 again, and now return 2 zeros, because I've now ignored 2 zeros. And now, again, I need to move my decimal, and again, nothing has changed in my first factor, so I'm still moving my decimal 1, 2 times because there are only 2 digits after the decimal. And so I'm going to reveal my decimal at the end of this whole number and move it 2 times to the left as we always do. We never move it the other direction. And this will reveal that you will get $130. And now you can add up all of your partial products and reveal the true answer to, right here, to how much 222 beads times 65 cents really is. Now this is the longer way of doing it in 3 steps. Of course, the shorter version, the shortcut version would be simply to take your 222 and multiply it by 65 cents. This is the way I would write it, and I would again ignore the decimal and go about doing the traditional way of double-digit multiplication and then returning the decimal into my final product by moving it from the right to the left. Please take a look at questions 4 and 5 now and complete those, and then return for the rest of this lesson. And remember that when they're talking about decimal places, as in this question, decimal places, describe the relationship between the number of decimal places you've seen in the decimal product or answer and the number of decimal places in the decimal factor, or the numbers you're using to multiply. What they're talking about when they say decimal places is the number of digits behind the decimal. So in this case, it's the 6 and the 5. So there are 2 decimal places in your factors, and how many decimal places did you see in your answer? On question number 6, it says the owners of the 7C Spice Company want to sell twice as much spice in the future as they do now. There's some alliteration. The table shows how much spice they sell in a week now and how much they want to sell in the future. Show how to get the answers by adding. Here we're going to be just adding decimals, repeated addition. Could simply multiply these by 2, but for cloves, they had 3 tons, or 3/10 of a ton, and they want to sell double that, so there'd be twice as much as 3/10, which, if you're using addition, would simply be 3/10 plus 3/10, which is 6/10. With a 0 in front if you need it there. And 6/10 would be your final answer for that. And that's all you're going to be doing with the rest of these, is doubling them. And you can do that with repeated addition. So finish the table over here and questions number 7 and 8 on your own.